Welcome back, witches, to Love, Lust, and Magic. I'm so grateful you're here today. And this one really goes out to all the occultists, the magicians, and the seekers out there. Today, I had the privilege of interviewing the icon, the legend, the occultist historian around town himself, Mitch Horowitz, who I have been such a fan of for so many years. He truly is such an incredible speaker and writer and author who weaves really incredibly researched, well-cited history with just such a beautiful narrative around the history of occultism, of New Thought, of spirituality. And today we talk about so many things, but we really talk about his new book, Modern Occultism, which is a tome of esoteric wisdom. It really goes through the whole kind of history of occultism in the Western world, and it does so well researched, so interesting, so lively, and it's so just easy to make this shit boring. Mitch, in true Sagittarian nature, could never make this shit boring. So today we talk about his new book. We talk about what it means to be a modern seeker, some of the pitfalls of the path, and it's just a really inspiring conversation. I hope that you guys enjoy it, and on with the show. Mitch Horowitz, I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you. I have admired your work, your vision, and your heart for so long. You are an author, an occult historian, and now with The Kabbalion, a filmmaker. You're also the author of Modern Occultism, which I am so excited to talk to you about. But before we dive into that, I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about how you found this incredible mystical niche of work that you're in.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for the humanity and the insight and the joy that you bring to these subjects, which I appreciate enormously.
Thank you.
I think I have been interested in mythology, folklore, occultism ever since I had been a little kid. I was growing up in the borough of Queens, specifically in the town of Belrose, for any fans of Eastern Queens among your listenership. And I would walk to the local public library and constantly take out books on superstition and folklore and Bigfoot and flying saucers and so forth. And then as I got older, I think those interests were always there, but they became secondary. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, I got into publishing, and I always had a very fitful relationship with publishing. The field was good to me, but I wasn't really sure that it was what I was supposed to be doing or what I wanted to be doing. Yeah. It took me away from my writing. And I guess it must have been in the late 90s, I landed what was supposed to be my dream job. And always beware when people tell you what your dream job is and that you found it. Yeah. And I was hired as, at least the intention was, I was hired as a progressive editor for a conservative press that thought it wanted a progressive editor. But of course, we often think we want things that we don't really want. Yep. And true to form, they didn't really want that. So for a variety of reasons, that didn't work out. And I was fired, and it was very painful. And I found a new job at a New Age publisher, and I went there, and instead of treating it as this temporary way station or something, I actually fell into the material on their backlist, and it helped reignite in me my fascination for this stuff going back to when I was a kid. And even more than that, it gave me territory to write in. You know, I felt like I was someone at that time who had left behind writing, and that was something I rarely spoke of, but internally was painful. Yeah. And I didn't really feel, and I would venture a lot of people encounter this, I didn't really know where to channel my interests. I didn't want to be a guy bopping around writing book reviews for the Village Voice or, critiquing other people's work. I didn't feel, frankly, like my voice was really needed in politics, because there's so many people writing in that space. And I just didn't have a sense of purpose. And then as I rediscovered some of the esoteric and occult material that ignited my imagination as a kid, I felt that there was a gap there in terms of people bringing a full-throated historicism to this material, treating this material with the degree of seriousness that its best writers and historical figures warranted. And it gave me a whole sense of direction, and I never looked back.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally slaying the game. I feel like you have a new book every few months, and it's not just that you write books, it's that you write these books that truly are like so well documented, so well researched, like the amount that you pour into the historical analysis while weaving like a compelling narrative. It seems so, like you do it so well. It's like a ballerina. It seems easy, but it's truly so difficult. And I definitely relate with the, getting fired kind of being a good thing. I had a similar experience writing for a female or like a women's kind of vertical on, some woo-woo stuff. And they eventually fired me, and that's kind of what let me write, more books. So I totally feel like part of being a seeker and on this path is kind of surrendering to the punches being thrown at times. And I just feel like you've done that so well. And your new book, really, like all your books have this just depth of knowledge, depth of research, but your new book, Modern Occultism, is like mind-blowing in that every fucking line of that book is like filled with history and filled with research. And like what was the process like? It's a big book. It is a thick book. You really go through from like Kemet, ancient Egypt, up through like more present times of just different strains of occultism, like how you did with Occult America, but with the whole world. So I would love to ask, before we kind of get into like about the book, what was your process like writing that? How did if any, like your magical practice or your spiritual practice support you in kind of creating something so deep?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I look back on it sometimes, and it was such a journey. I did feel a tremendous depth of love and passion for the material, and that drove me. Yeah. And I think part of my operating function as I was working on the book was I would always ask myself, how do I know this is true? Because someone says that Thomas Edison said this, or Louis XVI said this, or Cleopatra did this, how do I really know it's true? Because we get into this thought habit in our culture, and everybody does, of just assuming because something was recorded somewhere that it almost certainly occurred that way. Yeah. And as you peel the onion back, it's very, very surprising. And sometimes little things, or supposedly little things that, let's say, ought to be obvious, are really very far from obvious. Like let's say a certain ancient literature, like a certain ancient occult literature, or what came to be called occult, was rediscovered in the Renaissance. A story might get told about how it was rediscovered, but when you peel back the onion, you realize that endearing story may not necessarily be true. It might just be cultural myth, and it sounded attractive and neat, and it makes for a good opening, and so people repeat it. So I constantly kept trying to push myself to corroborate, to find multiple sources, to ask which sources could be trusted, and also to find humanity in the individuals, because I am frozen if I can't find that humanity. I mean, everybody, whatever their foibles, makes an effort to live for something. And, I can't really find my way inside a historical character until I find that something, which may be one thing among many different facets of a person's character, that I want to defend or that I want to question. And so I was always just trying to go deeper and ask myself, how do I know something is true? Are there multiple sources for this? Do I believe the multiple sources? And also to avail myself of sources that I might not always like. I mean, there are certain writers that for whatever reason we might feel a personal dislike for, but I had to say to myself, put that away on a shelf. I have to know everything. Even if I don't dig somebody's work in the broad sense, they might possess some piece of knowledge that I'm missing. And I can't tell you how many times that came to my rescue. We have to be really, we as artists, we as seekers, we have to be really flexible in terms of our sources, because there's people whose work maybe I've had a brief against, but I allowed myself to fall into it because they still may know something. So I tried to bring a lot of flexibility to it as well.
Oh, I love that. And that's spoken like such a true Sagittarius, like that holding the ideal of truth and going after that, and it's almost like you remind me of like a really good actor preparing for a role where it's like they think of the motives of the character, they connect with the character, they humanize them. And then it really is kind of like energetic alchemy where you're able to kind of, warp the time space continuum and like step into this person's like, experience. And it really shows throughout the book. Like you really do, again, meld the history with this kind of like liveliness and this like, it's a really interesting book to read. And like, I'm not just saying that is a lot of history books, especially with like stuff like occultism, where there's, like you said, like there's so many different sources. It can get very kind of like repetitive, textbook dry, and you really weave such a compelling narrative that is kind of, I think, woven through by this like, longing to know, this seeking. One of the quotes I really love from the beginning is very simple, but it's, people are generally born into Judaism, Christianity, or any number of traditional faiths. Occultism or esotericism, however, is something sought after. And I feel like that really is like the book that this, occultism, the path of the seeker, it's something that, we don't necessarily have the language to explain why we have that desire or that longing, but it's something that I really recognized reading this book that has kind of been, compelling people throughout recorded history and probably for much longer than that. And I guess my question is like, if there was one thing that modern or ancient seekers could teach us, like if there was kind of one lesson from this book that you think would be very important for like modern audiences to hear, inspired by these ancient seekers, what would it be?
Wow, that's an incredible question. I've never been asked that before. I suppose one of the things that mark the dedication of ancient seekers is that life was so precarious for them, and a bad harvest, a bad hunt, could be the dividing line between life or death in their village or enclave or even their city. And when they did things, they did them with a real degree of dedication. If they were making a pilgrimage, let's say, to an Egyptian god or goddess like Sekhmet, they might have to walk 100 miles, to reach that shrine, to make that pilgrimage. And they would be dependent upon hospitality, people taking them in. They'd be dependent upon luck, maybe bandits not, like seizing them when they're on the road. They made terrible sacrifices, just to go and kneel at the foot of a god or goddess in statuary form, or any number of such things. And I think today we have so much available to us, obviously, and we have so much physical comfort. And yet, on Twitter, everybody's fucking angry, and I can't even understand it. Everybody's pissed off about everything. And yet, I've got air conditioning running here. I've got, foods from all over the world in my kitchen that I can go eat when we're done. And many people have this, not everybody, but they're all pissed. And my feeling is the ancients, when they did something, they went all the way. I mean, there was just no halfway, like, I'm sort of interested in Athena, or I'm sort of interested in Set. There was no sort of anything. They really had to dedicate themselves. And, that's for each individual seeker to decide. But I think that there's I think we dig somewhat shallow wells nowadays, because everything is so easily accessible. And my feeling is, be into whatever you're into, whatever speaks to your passions, your emotions, but allow yourself to really dive into the deep end of the pool, because I think that we don't always have those experiences, and ancient men and women had no choice but to have those experiences because life was precarious.
I love that. And I feel like even, the words that are coming to me are devotion and sacrifice, which are such kind of, important parts of the spiritual path. Like devotion can really, we might not be, like you said, walking to these ancient temples, but we can erect these altars in our homes, create these temples in nature, and find the devotion to like go and honor them regularly. Like it's almost like, because there are, our attention can be spread in so many different ways, that it's like the challenge itself of finding regular devotion becomes like the road to it. It's and with that sacrifice too, I feel like the theme of kind of not of the beauty of not getting what you want has kind of been coming up for just what I've been listening to and in my own kind of life and practice, and it very much feels like that there is almost like you're able to sacrifice or offer something, whether it's comfort, having to walk to the temple in the ancient days, or like now like giving up something that's like something that you no longer want, whether that's a thought pattern, or maybe like for me, I'm always kind of, if I'm doing, a tolerance break from weed, I'm like, okay, I'm going to devote this to the goddess, or to a specific kind of energy or archetype, as a way to weave that sacrifice into my spiritual practice. And I love that. I love the idea of just kind of going deep, also kind of very Sagittarius, being pulled by the things that inspire you and call to you. And I love that you brought up Sekhmet too, and Leo season feels right. So yeah.
And I think that we can afford to sometimes put ourselves into positions of discomfort, apropos of sacrifice. One of the things I valued in my search, and I don't talk about this very much, and I don't write about it very much, I maybe make some distant allusions to it in the book. For about 8 years, I was involved in the Gurdjieff work, the path brought by the spiritual philosopher G.I. Gurdjieff. And I would have to say that one of the great, it's a very tough work. I mean, it depends upon what strain of it you're in, but it's a tough work. And one of the great gifts that work gave to me was my sense of self got the sort of inflated sense of self that's at work when errant use is made of words like enlightenment or awakening or realization. All that stuff gets punctured very, very quickly. And, one of my experiences in that work, which I value tremendously, was, for example, you might be away somewhere, maybe on a camping trip, maybe at a cabin, some unfamiliar place, and you might get awakened at some incredibly inconvenient hour to do an unfamiliar task. And, you learn to evaluate yourself on a different scale, and you see how difficult it is. And so often in life, so much is done for us that keeps us within this cocoon of physical comfort. It's fairly uncommon that most of us will ever change a flat tire, for example. Not exactly a catastrophe, but a pain in the ass that we are very often shielded from. We, in let's say North America, and I think that can contribute to a lot of fantasies. That can contribute to a lot of fantasies of people thinking that they're in a position intellectually or otherwise to like talk down to other people or to speak in terms of enlightenment. And it's like, dude, until, you're on a camping trip and it's raining and you can't find your backpack, let's see how you keep it together before you talk of enlightenment. So I think that I don't have a formula for how people should put themselves into those situations. That's going to be intrinsic to every individual. Yeah. But we should at least be aware that we dwell in situations of unbelievable physical comfort, apropos of history, apropos of the rest of the world. And that should make us a little more chill in terms of our self-assessment.
Yeah, I think that's such a great idea, and I totally am with you on the when people are throwing like words like enlightenment and ascension and all of that stuff around.
Right.
Like, it's what was it? Ram Dass was like, you think you're enlightened? Spend a week with your family. And
exactly.
I'm like, literally, I get in full Brat mode when I'm with my extended family for too long, and I'm like, okay, gonna lock myself in the bathroom, gotta breathe. And
right.
I think that kind of that recognition that like, I think there's a lot of talk that like we're, the Kali Yuga and the worst time in history. And like, I'm not, climate change, obviously climate crisis, the planet, she is not happy. I'm not saying she's not, but like as humans, we are definitely, I think, in, like some of the best times that we could have been in, speaking especially as a woman who can open a bank account and own property
Absolutely.
and get divorced and has rights and just, that there's no slavery. I think that kind of taking assessment like that and, taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture is so helpful. And I've been really contemplating the idea that like, if your spiritual practice or your magical practice or your path doesn't make you a better person, then what's the point? Because like,
I totally dig. Yeah.
Like, I'm like, at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the great work and hopefully burn off as much karma in this life as we can, but like none of that shit is promised. We may have 30 like 100 300 1,000 more lifetimes, and I feel like all we can really do is just like use our spiritual work to make us more compassionate, understanding, and help each other. It's like none of us are meant to do this alone. And I kind of just, I say that as I'm sitting in, my nice apartment with air conditioning and some coffee that like my machine made. Like, I think that kind of the reality check of like, like it's easy to have the spiritual practice, that mystical connection when it's all going smoothly. But then when, like you said, it's kind of when the shit hits the fan too, but that's when it, the practice pays off. But definitely need the reality check sometimes.
We desperately need the reality check, and the Ram Dass quote that you used is so important, and there's so much in that if we could just live with it, because we are slaves to our emotions, slaves to our patterns. And also the last place that we're willing to look, of course, is at ourselves, is in terms of conduct, in terms of relationships, like every now and then the QAnon people or QAnon adjacent people will find their way to me on Twitter, and they just love me. And, of course they want to like burn witches again. And, I think damn near literally. And I wish them a long life of failure. And they're so hung up on finding evil in these other places, and they're unreachable. They're simply unreachable, as most of us are. And I want to say to them, but it's futile. If you're looking for evil or whatever, I mean, is it really necessary to use so extreme a term? If you're looking for problems, in this world to which you can apply yourself, which is ostensibly what you claim to be doing, ask, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, your partner, your kids, whomever, are you helpful to them? Do you keep your word? Do you show up on time for shit? Did you fix the garage door like you said? Just see what they say. But it's the venture that none of us will ever take, because it immediately brings us down from that level of heroism that we want to think in to the level of how do I actually interact with immediate people in my life? And frankly, what other measure is there of personal progress?
Literally. That's they would like you, but I just appreciate how you have always also like been so vocal and supportive of witchcraft specifically. I feel like there can be, like in the occultism space, I feel like it's very kind of masculine, male dominated. Obviously the witchcraft space is way more kind of women, non-binary, femme dominated, and there can be kind of a split, I feel like, in the, philosophers and magicians that are kind of in the cult stream versus witch stream. And you have always truly been there for witches, supported us, talked against, countries and cultures that are burning witches, and have done a really good job of also kind of like keeping the like current affairs going with like the witch hunts around the world. So just thank you from Witches Everywhere. We see it and we appreciate it.
I can't tell you how much that means to me. The first time I was on Coast to Coast AM was back in 2005, and we got on the topic of witchcraft, and I the next day got an email from someone who said, I'm 17 years old and I'm always taking shit at school for being a witch. Aww. And I want to thank you for sticking up for witches. And I thought, this is the only audience member, who I want to write for and speak to. Yes. I was so moved by it.
It's so special, and it's definitely, I think that's such a beautiful example of kind of like where we are in time too. It's like really one of the only times in history where we can openly claim the title of witch without, at least in the Western world and North America and this part of the country, like, claim the title of witch without as much fear of persecution. I mean, I say that as somebody raised in the Deep South. I recognize that there are pockets where people aren't safe to truly be expressed, but like as a whole, we're definitely, on our way to being more witchy, which I'm very grateful for.
We totally are, and there are going to be instances, and these instances are going to shock and hurt us, where the opposite happens, and we get reminded that there's bad actors out there who will not listen to an individual's self-definition, regardless of how clearly it's stated. But apropos of what you were saying earlier, it is a remarkable time in history, and we have to ask ourselves, what do we owe to that? Do we want to sit around, complaining that my Frappuccino was warm, or do we want to use that opportunity to really immerse ourselves in things in ways that people all over the world are not capable of today? Yeah. And so we should use this moment.
I love that. It's almost like transmuting like the frustration and the anger and devoting it and alchemizing it into something, greater. It's like, okay, like how can I channel this rage at my first world problems and use that as fuel for something greater, which is like, such a big part of your work. You really help people like start, I feel like, at the basics, which isn't anything outside of yourself. It's not, as a witch, I love my tools, I love my altar, but at the end of the day, I'm like, you can be a witch and literally just have your mind and your breath and your heart, and that's it. That's the only temple you need. Right. And I think that recognizing that, another thing I really appreciate about your work is that you both are such a proponent of thought and thought metaphysics and thought causality, while also recognizing that there's like layers in society and systems of oppression that make the playing field definitely not leveled for everybody. Like you've never, even though you write about and are really such a beautiful historian on these kind of different like thought sciences, you never are like, oh yeah, if you just, you can think your way out of poverty. If you say your manifestation mantra, like you're going to be able to get everything. You're like, no, like your mind, like it's almost like you're starting in the Temple of Malkut. You're starting at the base. Mm-hmm. You're starting in Asya, like really the physical kind of expression of magic, which is the brain, and then you're working out. So how did you kind of get into like the thought metaphysics and kind of that field, and I would love to just know maybe like how you work with that in your own life and how you've kind of seen your life transform through the seeking of working with the brain and not against it.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that question enormously, because mind metaphysics, new thought causation, these are areas of tremendous dedication for me personally. Mm-hmm. They're areas of tremendous interest, both as a seeker and as a writer. I had a book out last year called Daydream Believer, where I came to my best reckoning about thought causation. And one of the reasons I'm so attracted to it, and one of the reasons that I actually have a very deep love for the kind of golden oldies in that field, whether it's Florence Scovel Shinn, The Game of Life and How to Play It, or Magic of Believing, or Think and Grow Rich, or you name it. I have a lot of love for that literature, because I think that, first of all, it brought metaphysics to a huge swath of people, and there's no telling where that's going to go. And I feel enormous attraction toward the simplicity of it. It's like what you were saying, that an individual can be a witch possessed of heart, mind, intellect. You're a witch. Mm-hmm. You don't need accoutrements. You don't need many witches may have altars, but it's not some fee of entry, Mm-hmm. And I feel that metaphysics, if the individual's mind has extra physical dimensions, which I firmly believe, and that's my entire definition of spirituality, extra physicality. If we have extra physical dimensions to thought, that has implications in all kinds of ways, and accessing that in the simplest possible way is my chief interest as a seeker. What's the most direct way that the individual, myself included, can get in touch with those extra physical facets of being. And New Thought has done a pretty good job of that. I think it's done a better job of popularizing itself than it has of refining itself, and that's where my difficulty comes in, because I do believe in the basic premise of New Thought. I do believe that thoughts are causative, but I also believe that it's not the only game in town, that we experience many different laws and forces. And in the same way that, let's say, ESP, extrasensory perception, can be demonstrated in a laboratory setting, it's not like dentistry where it always comes out the same way every time, or ideally so. It's just much more elusive, and you can go in a clinical setting and get very different results. And those things occurred, but they're not necessarily repeatable in the same way. And thought causation, because it's occurring not in a clinical or laboratory setting, but out in the messy world, is going to be all the more fraught with difficulty. And it's really hard to track the workings of the dynamic, if it's present, and if there is a relationship, a metaphysical relationship, let's say, between thought and concretized event. It's occurring within a very complex, very dynamic playing field, with infinite factors, perhaps, that could get introduced into it. So the simplicity of it, unfortunately, as appealing as it is, doesn't fully hold up across the arc of a person's complicated life. And I have to wrestle with that, and I have to come to terms with that. And we see this just in matters of geography. I mean, I'm, I don't know, perhaps 1 mile away from where I'm seated is somebody who's in a desperately stifling economic position, and I reject that. That's because that person has bad vibes. I mean, that just doesn't hold up.
Literally.
No mature person could believe that. Or look at the nation of Haiti. I mean, it's being torn apart by gang violence. People are just trying to keep day-to-day life together, and it's not because, like, well, you guys need a motivational seminar.
Literally,
really,
they manifested it. Like,
right.
Babes.
I mean, it's so fucking complex. Look at the fires in Hawaii. People lost their homes. It's so complex. So I really insist that this is why I do not use the term law of attraction. This colloquially, it suggests that we live under this one mental super law, and I reject that. I won't. But I also have to add. I refuse to jump on this bandwagon of insisting that I hate The Secret and I hate, everything about that book and movie. I do not hate The Secret, and I think that Rhonda Byrne, she had a vision. She carried out that vision. I admire the hell out of what she did. I just have differences with her. I don't share Rhonda's perspective that we live under one mental super law. I do share her perspective that thought ultimately may be the arbiter of experience. But we are very far away from that because we live, or rather I should say we experience, many, many different laws and forces. And that has to render that point of view more complex and difficult. So it's like, for me as a seeker, I'm not interested in demonstrating seriousness by saying I hate The Secret or I hate this or that. I'm interested in staying true to some sort of seriousness intimately by feeling unsettled and uncertain about these topics. I will probably be dedicated to New Thought for a long time to come, and that dedication has brought me many good things, but it is a troublesome, it's very difficult to be a cartographer of that realm because that realm is much more complicated than I think the dominant literature has given us reason to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that so hard, and I really just applaud and support, your validation of, you're not thinking yourself into poverty. You're not thinking yourself into cancer. You're not thinking yourself into
Yes.
a war-torn country. And I've even experienced that where I'm like, oh, like I've been getting sick a lot. Like, is it my, you know, my health anxiety post-COVID and me thinking about getting sick, getting me sick. And it's like so kind of dominant in the, I feel kind of like wellness and spiritual space that like, oh, if you take this one money course, so if you say these affirmations, like you're totally going to change your life and everything is going to be great and you're just going to manifest everything you want. And it's like, you know, like maybe our ancestors who didn't have technology, who didn't live in these crazy urban cities, who were living more connected to nature, who had more access to their consciousness because they were living in a more aligned way. Like, I feel like they were probably on some shit that we're not going to be in because we sacrifice that kind of, you know, ease of connection to living in this world. And like you said, like it is not just one, you know, one law, one thing that we live under. And it's not, you know, either or. It's like that can be true. And like The Secret did kind of, you know, it was like probably, it was a spark on my journey. I did Rhonda's book, The Magick, and that was like going into college. And that really was like a very powerful ritual practice for me. Like both things can exist at once. And I think that one of the most important tools for any occultist or witch or seeker is discernment, being able to discern what feels right and resonant for you. Because like, you know, like sometimes I'll have a bad feeling about somebody or like a teacher and I'm not necessarily sure why, and I'm just like, this doesn't align with me and I'm going to take what serves me and leave what doesn't. And I think that kind of having that, you know, like we have the privilege to pick and choose and kind of create our own occultism landscape in our hearts and our practices, and it's so much better than just taking what somebody says at face value because you think that, you know, they know better than you. It's like nobody knows better than you know yourself. Like I really truly believe that as soon as somebody thinks they know you better than you know yourself, like maybe I feel like maybe therapists and psychologists can kind of get the pass, but like anybody else, a guru, I'm like, no, like you are the master of yourself, and you're not responsible for the shitty things that happen to you because you thought about something bad once.
I agree. And I think the seeker has to be really self-protective.
Yeah.
I like my search nowadays is mostly solitary. I mean, I have people I exchange with. I have people who I consider co-seekers. I spent years within different groups and such. And it's for every individual to decide, but I think people have to be really careful of the theatricality of some of these groups, and the manner in which whoever it is, the guru, the motivational teacher, the clergy, the shrink, whomever it may be, that person is very cognizant of there being a kind of theatricality to the encounter. He or she is aware that the newcomer is looking at them as the man with the plan, and you know, and that figures into the power dynamic. And it behooves the seeker to be really, really careful about that, because again, every one of us, I have seen. I mean, what's the old expression? I don't know who it's attributable to, but laws are like sausages. No one should ever see them being made. Yeah, literally. And having worked in publishing and just been around for a while, I've gotten to see how the sausages are made and getting to know really some primary people on the spiritual scene, celebrities on the spiritual scene, but also seeing in private how they go batshit, you know, just at the slightest thing going wrong. And it's like, that's who you are. And you're missing the greatness of the teacher. The greatness of the teacher would be to share that, to say, you know, the truth is, I went batshit the other day over something really petty, and then we can all begin to search together because it demonstrates the disadvantages facing all of us. And I think that the great oversight that many of the present generation of teachers has indulged in is failing to reveal their own vulnerabilities. And because if they reveal those vulnerabilities, they think naturally, as we all do, well, that's going to detract from my cred. It will vastly increase your cred if there is such a thing, because we then all can start to search together. You know, I've interviewed famous gurus, and they'll go on responding to a question for 15 minutes, and it's so depleting because I know in private the odds that they face are much greater than what they're showing in public. And if they would show those odds in public, they don't have to be morbidly self-disclosing, but at least be revealing, then we all can groove to the terrible barriers that face all of us, and they are quite real.
Oh, I love that. I feel like that kind of authenticity and honesty, especially like with social media being such a way that people are sharing this stuff. And I say that as somebody who, I can pay my rent because of social media. I'm very, very grateful for that platform and for the freedom that we have to express ourselves in our own images, while also recognizing that it's a highlight reel, and it's very easy to make yourself seem holier than thou on there. But yeah, I've noticed, like in my own journey, I still kind of struggle with the word teacher because I feel like I don't fucking know anything. The more I learn, the less I know. And like, I'm just a forever student, and I very much rather be honest. I'm not out there shouting all my little imperfections just because I'm trying to be a little bit less of a chronic oversharer. But that kind of like truth, it's like people, if you're doing this work for the right reasons, whatever that means to you, for becoming a better person, for your personal evolution, not to be, like you said, holier than thou, but truly because you want to make a world a better place by showing up as a better person. I feel like when you're coming from that place, you can almost like sense when somebody else is being real and authentic. And there's just kind of this like mutual vibration, as cheesy as that sounds, but there really is this kind of like, people recognize that. And I think there's so much, like you said, value in that. And also like, I again, trust no guru. I think it's sometimes better absolutely to not meet your idols, because you can vibe with what somebody says without necessarily, like supporting somebody's work does not mean that you support everything they've ever said. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I was talking to my friend the other day about this. It's like a kind of almost the opposite side of cancel culture, where it's like, if you don't support what somebody says 100%, then they're like canceled. And it's like, we actually should be discerning and take and choose what we want from our teachers. It shouldn't be like us being like, oh yeah, like I like this person's teachings means that we like support everything they've ever done, because there's no way for us to know that, period. Again, social media is, like a highlight reel. But I'm also like, if anybody consider a teacher or a mentor or whatever isn't like basic, like just experience and showing basic kindness. I'm like, if you're rude to like a server or a waiter or somebody like checking you out at like your favorite store, like I'm just not in there. Again, if this is not helping you become a better person, then like, what's the point? You're just here to inflate your ego and like judge other people because they're quote unquote not as spiritual as you. It's just like falling back into the trap of not doing the work, There's
nothing more hilarious than judging someone for not being as spiritual as I am. It's like only human beings could come up with that. It's fantastic. Yeah,
it's like very funny. It's something I've been thinking about a lot too, because like I'll talk about this shit. I'm like, damn, I'm judging other people who I think are judging me. It's like this whole trap. And then you know what? I'm like, I really truly believe the universe. You got to have a sense of humor with her. Like, laugh or die miserable, bitch. If you're not laughing with the universe, she will laugh at you. So it's just like, you can't, and I think that sense of like play and joy on the path it's such medicine, because it's like, you can get, like you said, so serious so quick. You join an order and you worry about like getting up the realms and getting all the initiations, and you're missing the actual the part of the path, or you're so caught up in the trappings of the spiritual, the trappings of the, like you said, like the theatrics of it, that you're like missing connecting to yourself. And it's like, I think that's this, some of the pitfalls of the path are the biggest teachers, but it's definitely a ride.
Yeah. And, the 19th century occult revival, especially the initiatory orders like Golden Dawn, they did many, many wonderful things, but they were very high. Their leadership was very high on this idea of initiatory ranks and titles and privileges and such. And it's interesting because when Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott left New York City and went to India in late 1878, early 1879, the locus of their interest tended to shift toward Vedism and Buddhism. And more of Madame Blavatsky's work, especially Secret Doctrine, came to take on a Vedic quality. And there were some seekers who were very unhappy with that because they thought, well, we're not against this stuff, but we want training in practical magic. And they felt very driven to create that experience that they felt was missing in Madame Blavatsky's work after she shifted her locus to India. And so when orders like the OTO and the Golden Dawn and the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and others got created, the creators, the progenitors, they were doing all kinds of amazing things artistically and magically, but they looked towards Freemasonry. They look towards what fragments have come down to us from the mystery religions, and they sought to recreate these things with such gusto that they recreated a lot of what I would describe as artifice, liturgy, ceremony, pageantry, and it has touched us to this very day. Now, if that works for the individual, more power to you, but I do find that it's very easy to get lost in all of these initiatory ranks, and even organizations that announce themselves as the enemies of orthodoxy import these ranks. And everybody's the grand poobah this or the grand imperator that. And I'm like, guys, I'm not playing Dungeons and Dragons here. It's real life, And so it's just one of these things, we have to watch out because we love badges and we love flags. And sometimes they may be aesthetically beautiful, but they can be traps.
I really appreciate you saying that because I feel very much the same. And again, it's like for me, I'm really interested in a spirituality and a witchcraft and occultism that is something that I can live, something that's in my everyday, not just when I'm wearing my sash and, doing the whole thing. And I very much admire the Golden Dawn system. And also it's like, how realistic is that for somebody in this day and age to go, there's a reason it doesn't exist because those people are rich, had all the time in the world, were spending their days literally pretty much LARPing and doing magic. And like, how much of it is made up? I mean, obviously I'm not, it comes from sources, but like those traditions, the rituals were like, there's always a sense of personal gnosis. And at the end of the day, it's like, we all have access to that too. And I think it was Damien Eccles who made a really good point. He's like, people in these orders, in the hierarchical orders specifically, like you got, like you said, obsessed with kind of like, oh, I want to be like magus of this, or I want to like go to this sphere, like this like, this sphere and ascend. And it's like, you got more obsessed and more kind of fixated on like, quote unquote, getting the next initiation than like really taking the time to receive the initiation, receive what you're meant to be, like receive the teaching, receive the wisdom, like live it. And, you get more caught on the destination than the journey, which is like such a metaphor for this damn thing we call life. And yeah, I definitely, as somebody who's, I'm like a solitary occultist, anarchist occultist. I don't know. I kind of just do my own thing and mix ceremonial magic and witchcraft and sex magic. And I could not vibe with the hierarchy. I'm like, I don't want to, I can't imagine like having to deal also with the interpersonal drama that comes from that.
Right, for sure. And it just becomes its own, well, look, I mean, we replicate the world that we say we want to get away from. We run away from orthodoxy as children, and then we reproduce orthodoxy. Literally. It's human nature. Yeah.
I would love to ask a little, it's pretty on topic, but something that I've been really kind of noticing and grappling with the past, like, I don't know, for a while, but especially the past few weeks it's been coming up is like, I don't know if you've noticed this like in your space, but I feel like there's so much kind of repackaged Christianity recently in spiritual circles. I feel like it might kind of go with like the trad wife or like traditional kind of like movement on like social media. But I feel like whenever I hear people talk about like ascension or like kind kind of especially around like some like sex magic teachings where like it has to look a certain way, or like we're doing these things to like get into 5D. I'm like, it very much feels like regurgitated Christianity, where we're trying to leave our bodies and ascend and like do things in a certain way. And I guess my question is like, is that something you notice, and how do you kind of like both honor, you know, people's own practice while also like, how do you keep your own work expansive and not falling into kind of like one specific dogma, I guess is my question.
That is, I appreciate that question enormously, and it's very hard, and it really, really has to be watched for. You know, one of the things that occurred to me maybe just, I don't know, 3 months ago or so, is that to a very, very great extent, the New Age, and when I say New Age, as you understand, I mean it positively. I define New Age as a radically ecumenical culture of therapeutic spirituality. And that's what it is. And I participate in it. And if somebody wants to apply the label to me, it's fine. But I do think that one of the things I've discovered culturally is that the New Age is, in fact, very, very Christian in orientation, in the sense that the Abrahamic narrative, out of which came Judaism, Christianity, Islam, it's a very, very compelling narrative, and it's been it's shaped the Western mind for centuries and centuries and centuries. I mean, ever since Christianity became the official, semi-official religion of ancient Rome, that point of view that there's good guys and there's bad guys, and the way to the good guys is through these iterations that came down from Mount Sinai and then later were codified into the Beatitudes, and maybe still later codified into things recorded in the Quran. And if you're good, you know, you're going to get rain in the right season, and you're going to go to someplace good after you physically die. And if you're bad, something else, the opposite is going to happen to you. And there's this very cause and effect, good and bad, and we know what the coordinates of all that are. And that mindset is the Western religious mindset, and it's touched the New Age to a very, very, very deep extent. And so the New Age has been doing a good job, unfortunately, of replicating aspects of the outer culture, selecting enemies. You know, who are the bad guys? Who are we willing to let in, and who are we going to close the door on? And there must be invisible bad guys, like something called the Illuminati. And if I can identify them, then I'm a hero because I'm the good guy because I've broken through. And some of this is also part of the Gnostic thought system, which is a very compelling thought system, that we're kind of living in this world of illusion and we have to pierce it. It's really what the Barbie movie is about, basically. Yeah,
literally. Wow.
Right? You know?
Wow.
It's a Gnostic movie to a very great extent.
Oh my God, literally. Even down to the demiurge. Oh my God, Mitch. Wow, that's a whole other podcast episode, but...
It's a whole other episode.
Incredible.
It's very compelling, and there's truth to it. But the danger of that truth, as with all truths, is that I become the hero. Yeah. So I'm the good guy. So great, I'm Barbie and I'm enlightened Ken and I see through the shit. It's like, no, why, when did I get to self-elect that? So, and I think that we can see that within precincts of the New Age, the dividing line between who's good, who's bad, what's in, what's out, what leg of the search is acceptable, what leg of the search is not acceptable, is very sharply drawn. Yeah. And in many respects, it's just the shadow of Western culture in general. Yeah. So I think that we, as seeking people, have to really watch out for that just simple recreation. Because we all think we're the good guys. We're all 100% convinced, I'm Barbie, not whomever the bad guy is in the movie. I don't know who the bad guy is. I guess it's conformity. But I'm not the forces of conformity. I'm Barbie, and or like in the Matrix, I'm Neo. I'm not one of those bad archons fighting with him. And that's a tremendous leap of vanity. And it's incorrect because we're looking in the mirror of self-image, I'll say, versus the mirror of relationship. Whereas to other people, I'm very unlikely that way at all, So we, as a seeking community, all I'm really trying to say is that whether we identify as Christian or a New Age or this, that, the other thing, we have to be really super careful that we don't just simply recreate blindly these dichotomies of like, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, who belongs in, who belongs out. I am not anti-Christian. I have no interest whatsoever in pointing up the terrible hypocrisy of Christendom. Of course it's there, and it's there everywhere else on the planet as well.
Exactly.
You know, so I'm not going to get into this trip where I know who the bad guys are and I know just what to do about it.
Yeah.
And we know where that goes.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I really appreciate that, and definitely have to remind myself of that as well. And one of the practices that I've been working with, specifically working with kind of Thelemic and Western Goddess Babylon, is just the perspective of non-duality. I'm like, there are no good guys, there are no bad guys, we're all both. Like, you know, even being like, okay, like I can be a compassionate person, but like the idea of like a good person is like, it's very divisive. Like you said, at the end of the day, it's like us versus them. And you know, I'm on this path to become a better person, to become more compassionate, you know, quote unquote better, just to be more understanding of people who are different than me. And it can be very hard. And I really just appreciate and admire that reminder, and that Barbie reference, of course, was very appreciated.
Yeah. I was at a party the other night with a bunch of film people, and there was one guy there. I love him, and he remarked, it was so funny. He said something to the effect of, I'm depressed because I don't hate the Barbie movie as much as I'm supposed to. Because, you know, among the intelligentsia, we're supposed to have this critique of the Barbie movie. And I actually really, I liked it, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I love the awareness. And also I'm like, that's the point, babe. Also, there's so much commentary to be said about that too. I'm like, hating things that are very girly in women. And, you know, there's nuance. And the movie goes there and it acknowledges it. And I love it for it.
And it's also selling dolls, and we have to groove to that.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of different things going on. It's like truth can coexist with consumerism, and often does.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that's
I had a spiritual experience watching the Barbie movie. I was just like blown away. So I definitely recommend it. I love viewing it as Gnostic. And I guess we'll start wrapping up, but I have just a couple more questions.
By all means, yeah.
What was the greatest lesson, or what did you learn writing modern occultism that you'd like to share? Like, what was there a moment that something within you or that you experienced writing it? Because I know for myself, like when I'm writing a book, it's almost like that whatever I'm writing about, it's like that my life becomes an incubator for that, and all the threads kind of start crossing about whatever the topic is. So was there something about writing modern occultism that either deepened your own search or was just kind of like a profound moment, even if it was just finishing the book? We just love to hear that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Artistically, I felt like I was being too easy on myself at a certain point, and this book pulled me out of that.
Yeah.
You know, I'd started my writing career as a historian with Occult America in 2009, and then a few years later I published a book called One Simple Idea, which was a history of the positive mind movement. And I've worked hard on every book I've ever written, but after that I went in a direction that dealt more with practical spirituality, like with the Miracle Club and Daydream Believer, and I came to feel that I wasn't holding myself up to a sufficiently high standard with regard to some of the historical material that I determined to return to. And this book shook me out of that in a very heavy way. And I think I began to get shaken out of it a few years ago, where I was writing a chapter on ESP research, which I care very deeply about, for the book Daydream Believer. And the critics of ESP research, the skeptics of ESP research, are so vociferous that they come out of the woodwork as soon as you just say the initials ESP. And I said to myself, I want this chapter to really be a statement, and I'm going to back it up with source material that to any earnest observer is impeccable. And so I worked really, really hard at it, and I was very happy with it. And I said to myself, okay, now I'm going to replicate that on the scale of a full book in modern occultism, and do something that I haven't done fully since Occult America and One Simple Idea, which is now, well over, 15 and 10 years old, respectively. And so I threw myself into this, and I felt like I held myself to a higher standard in ways that reminded me of my earliest days of writing. And that was very meaningful to me personally.
Yeah.
And so I completed the book with a lot of joy, because I thought there was no chapter where I didn't subject myself to that. And I felt like I needed it. I needed to push myself again in a big, big way. And so that was very satisfying.
I love it. It's felt. And I also just want to say I loved Daydream Believer. I listened to that one.
Thank you.
That book is also like probably maybe my favorite book of yours. The essays are
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Incredible.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I worked very hard on that book. Thank you. You truly are a very prolific author, and all your books are just so well researched. This one is no different. My last question before you share where the audience can find you is, I know that you've been very open and honest about living with anxiety, and I relate. I have the same kind of thing going on, and I just wonder if you have any advice for people who are out there living with anxiety and listening and want to both honor and recognize the power of their mind, but also have that kind of anxious mind going at the same time. Do you have any advice or practices that somebody can kind of live with both of those things at once? I do. And what I would say is, ever since I was a little kid, I struggled with anxiety. Yeah. And anybody who struggles with anxiety or depression knows the experience of searching for that magic bullet, asking themselves, is it biochemical? Do I need meds? Is it something that mom did? Is it this? Is it that? Literally. And these things could just occupy our entire lives without ever getting us to an actionable response or answer. But the thing that has helped me tremendously, and I would have to say one of the reasons why I'm vastly more happy today than I was, for example, as an adolescent, is that it's absolutely vital and critical for the individual to separate him or herself from cruelty, from people who are down on us, don't support us, cut us down. And very often these can be people who are very close to us, including family members, including boyfriends or girlfriends or spouses or partners, including the person who's been our so-called best friend since 8th grade, but who always seems to find a way to just twist, that shank into your ribs at the unexpected moment. And people suffer under these things, and they feel choiceless. They feel they have to suffer under them, and they don't. And my estimation is, at this point in my life, I personally believe that most of us have too many relationships. I don't think that we as a human community are built for those relationships. I mean, it used to be that people's relationships were fairly limited, and now we're on social media 24/7 and so forth and so on. And I don't want to put that genie back in the bottle. There's no way to do it anyway. Yeah. But we can. I don't know why people feel that they have to circulate within large groups. And I don't know why people feel that, I mean, I do understand that there's a fear factor involved in, like, let's say you have an in-law or family member or whomever who diminishes you, and every year you invite that person to whatever holiday, and every year without fail, that person insults you. And, you don't have to invite that person. Now, there will be consequences. Somebody might get pissed off at you, whatever. There will be consequences. But there's going to be consequences no matter what you do. You can sit in your house all day and watch cartoons, and there's going to be consequences. And, don't be afraid of the consequences, because my personal experience is, and I can't imagine it's exclusive, has been that first of all, sometimes no consequences occur, none of any substance, which is very often the case in life. And what consequences do occur are very frequently nothing compared to the freedom that we feel. And I think that those of us who are prone towards anxiety do ourselves a terrible disservice by staying in proximity to anything or anyone that is depleting or cruel. And we have enormous freedom to get away from those circumstances That freedom, again, it may come with consequence, but I would look, the individual owes it to him or herself to find out how bad is the consequence. Maybe it's not so bad. Yeah. And I've gained greater happiness over the long term from getting away from cruel people and situations than any other single factor in my life. So if I am equipped to recommend anything, I recommend that.
Oh, you heard it here. You heard it here first, folks. Protect your peace. Protect your peace. Protect your peace. It's so important, and I really appreciate that, like, honest answer, because it's so true. It's like we do a lot of things to please other people, and while that's also important, it's like if you're not protecting your peace, then what's the point? So I appreciate it. Okay, Mitch, well, we're wrapping up the interview, so I would love to know where folks can find you, where they can buy your books, and I'll link everything in the show notes below so people can just, like, click.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. The book, Modern Occultism, is coming out on September 19th in print, digital, audio. It can be pre-ordered anywhere you buy your books.
Awesome. And you can you remind us of your socials as well, where people can find you on that?
Oh, sure. I'm primarily on Twitter and Instagram.
Awesome.
Twitter is @Mitch Horowitz, and Instagram is @Mitch Horowitz 23.
I love it, and we love the PRS. I'll make sure to have the episode out before then. And Mazel Tov, truly, this book is incredible. And yeah, we will see you at the PRS. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Love, Lust, and Magic. Mitch actually has an event at the Philosophical Research Society on December 17th called Occult America, Looking Back and Looking Forward. I highly, highly, highly recommend checking him out. He's an amazing lecturer, and you can find links to his website and to that event below, as well as his social media. And if you're listening and are interested in any of my work, I just recorded and released my series of classes called Perverting the Tarot, which is all about working with and reading the tarot erotically. My tarot deck, The Goddess of Love Tarot, it's for all the Venusians and the sex witches and the love witches out there, and it is out everywhere with art by Snakes for Hair, Julia Popescu. My full-length books, Sacred Sex, Bewitching the Elements, and Inner Witch are out in the world, as well as my guided journal, Embody Your Magic. And you can find my monthly essay series, including Diary of a Sacred Slut and other tarot spreads and lots of ritual guides and magic on my Patreon at Gabby Herstick. As always, that is linked below, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks for being here. Love, Lust, and Magic is produced by Zach Toman.